What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast. My name is Emmy Nixon. Today is Monday, May 15th, and we're going to be previewing the conference finals for 2023. It's always a great episode year over year. I'm excited for this one. But before that, joining me from Austin, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Ween. What's up?
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast. I believe it is episode 165.
Yep.
Eastern Conference and Western Conference Finals preview. It is actually a rehash of the Bubble Conference Finals, believe it or not. These are the same four teams from back in 2020 in the Bubble. We have two play-in teams that made the conference finals this year after no play-in team had actually won a series up until this point in these playoffs. The Miami Heat, credit to them, going up against the Boston Celtics, who had their backs up against the wall. We're down 3-2 against the Philadelphia 76ers, made some adjustments in Game 6 that we might talk about later, and Tatum put on an all-time performance in Game 7 yesterday afternoon. And then we had the Lakers drown out the Warriors for the first time, I believe, in a non-finals series, because they lost to LeBron in the 2016 finals and they lost to Kawhi and the Raptors in the 2019 finals, but they had never lost a Western Conference series with Draymond, Clay, and Steph all healthy in this era of basketball dating back to 2014. But LeBron was able to get that done. Credit to the Lakers for that. So we're going to start with the East. We're going to talk about the series, what we think is going to happen, the keys, what we're watching for, give our prediction, and then we'll move on to the West. Make sure that you like and subscribe. We'll have a bunch more content coming here very soon, but we're halfway through the NBA playoffs, and it's time to talk some basketball. So, the Miami Heat and the Boston Celtics. Let's just go back and forth. Back and forth conversation. I'll start with you. What are you looking for?
Well, in this series, I think it really comes down to Jimmy Butler and Eric Spoelstra and how long they can stretch this. Because if you look at the rosters across the board outside of Jimmy Butler, in theory, with how Jimmy Butler has played in these playoffs, he's been the best player on the floor for this series, in theory. And there's no denying that. And also, Eric Spoelstra is by far the best coach in the playoffs right now. One thing that I'm looking at is Boston just came off of facing a team that wasn't very adaptable and not very malleable to different coverages that you throw at them. And now they're facing a Miami Heat team who is the ultimate malleable unit. And Spoelstra is so good at adjusting from game to game, from possession to possession, from matchup to matchup, getting it right. And I just think that's going to be the question. Will Joe Mazzulla have enough counters to counteract those things? And also, will Jason Tatum be the best player on the floor? Because if he does that, then I think the Boston Celtics have the requisite talent to put this series away rather quickly.
You spoke to the coaching advantage that I think the Miami Heat will have for the rest of the playoffs, most likely. If they even beat the Boston Celtics somehow and move on to the finals, they have the best coach, no doubt, remaining in these playoffs in my mind. And they may have had the best coach to start out with coming into the playoffs. I mean, there are some debates that you could have there, but we won't talk about that today. The biggest concern I've had with the Celtics, although there are other concerns that have arisen throughout the playoffs in the first two series, is I still do not fully trust them when the game is close late in the fourth quarter. And you spoke to it. I believe that Jason Tatum, when the games are close, he's got to be the closer like he was in Game 6 against Philly. And the thing that's impressed me most with Tatum, especially in that Philadelphia series, is he was having arguably one of the worst games of his career up until that fourth quarter in Game 6 against Philly. And the great players in this league's history just keep shooting. And they have that mindset, that killer instinct, which we've sort of almost yet to see from Tatum at a consistent level in the playoffs, although he has shown it at times.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I love from Tatum. He's going to have to be the guy late in close games. And Boston can't get sloppy in those fourth quarters if the games are tight, because the Heat, as you spoke to, they're a veteran team. They've been in these situations before. This is a team that was in the finals, a couple years back. Jimmy Butler is a killer. We know that in late close games. I like the way that Bam Adebayo has been more assertive as of late, but I'll talk about that here in a second. But you just can't get sloppy, and Jason Tatum has to be the guy in close games. For me, though, the series comes down to what can Miami muster outside of course, Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. In the first round series against Milwaukee, Kevin Love was great from the perimeter. Max Strus was great from the perimeter. They were consistently knocking down 3-point shots. I think if they want to stretch this series, like you say, to 6 or 7 games and maybe even give themselves a chance to win, it's going to have to be a continuation of that. Max Strus is going to have to knock down shots consistently from 3. You're going to have to get Caleb Martin involved offensively. Gabe Vincent is going to have to do what he's done in the past and knock down some important shots. I just don't know, even though that the Celtics have been concerning to a point in these playoffs. They've been sort of inconsistent defensively, although I do give Joe Mazzulla credit for going to the Robert Williams, Al Horford bigger lineup in game 6, which was a great adjustment that he should have made earlier, but
Right.
better late than never. How does that all work out? Does Miami's role players give them enough? I think it's hard for me to totally count out this Heat team, but I do think Boston, up and down the roster, outside of maybe Jimmy Butler, is overall, of course, the better team. It's just going to come down to me, how much help can they give Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo? Because I'll give you this. Since Jimmy Butler rolled his ankle in game 1 against the Knicks, he hasn't quite been as good. He's still been good, but he hasn't been as good as he was, during the first series and outside of that. 24.5 points per game on 41% shooting and only 1 of 8 on 3-pointers. I'll be interested to see how the Celtics split time with their wing defenders on Jimmy Butler. They can put, Jaylen Brown on him, Marcus Smart, Derek White. They have a bunch of options, but without Tyler Hero, someone else is going to have to step up big time.
Right. And the great thing about the Heat is Jimmy Butler has been so dominant both as a power passer and a scorer to the point where if the defensive team sends a second defender, it just activates, swing, and then you're getting the open 3. It's just whether or not they make those open 3s. They're going to get those shots if Jimmy Butler has the offensive performance that we know he's capable of. And then one other thing I wanted to say on Tatum is he needs to take more mid-range jumpers this series.
Yes.
He's taken half the mid-range shots that James Harden did in these playoffs. So we
Yes.
saw it a little bit more in Game 7. I think if he's only shooting threes and trying to get to the basket only, that plays right into the Miami Heat's hands on defense because they want to funnel everyone. They want to get you off the three-point line and then funnel everyone to Bam Adebayo's rim protection. So you're playing right into the Miami Heat's hands if you're not taking those mid-range shots that they're giving to you.
Yeah, you must have watched Hoops Tonight with Jason Timpf, right?
Right.
I watched that too. And he made a great point that you spoke to, and I'll kind of echo your sentiment. I think one of the knocks on Tatum has been, at least this season, is at times, and maybe even going back to last year, at times he becomes a little bit too predictable offensively. And great players like Tatum and like other players in this league, are at their best when there's a variety within their game offensively. Taking the mid range, getting to the basket, which we know he can do, and then obviously one of the better 3-point shooters there are remaining, if not the best, remaining in these playoffs, doing that as well. But you do not want to play into the Miami Heat's hands because they're a lesser talented team and you don't want to give them any sort of hope or advantage in that area. So, yes, take more mid range shots, take what the defense gives you, and be confident. Do what you did, in game 6 in that fourth quarter. Just keep taking shots. Of course, Jaylen Brown, I think, will continue to be consistent. Malcolm Brogdon has knocked down some huge shots in these playoffs. He's continued to be a great pickup for them. They're the deeper team. They're the more talented team. It just comes down to, for me, how much do the Heat get out of those role players offensively? You mentioned it. They're going to get those shots, but do they knock them down on a consistent basis? Can they potentially get turn back the clock game from Kyle Lowry in one of these games and steal a game on the road or something like that? Boston has not been great at the TD Garden outside of yesterday in these playoffs. I believe they've lost 3 games at home in these playoffs. And with Miami knowing how to win on the road and with Eric Spoelstra, if these games are close late, I still don't fully trust Boston. I do think they're the more talented team, though. And I think if I had to make a bet, Boston in 6. But I won't be surprised if it's Boston in potentially 5. If they take care of business and Jason Tatum is that guy.
Right. Yeah. I agree with that 100%. The one thing that does concern me is a game 6 on the road in Miami. We know how
Yes.
energized that crowd can be and how good that they play at home as well. Jimmy Butler just feeds off of that energy, and that's one thing that I'd say is iffy. But if you're Boston, you just got to take it a game at a time and play smart, because as long as they're not making those crucial mistakes, letting the Miami Heat get out in transition, letting them get into a rhythm early, as long as they're dialed in on their defensive keys like they were in that game 7, um, I think they'll get this done in 5 games.
Yeah, and I have one more thing to say from a Miami standpoint. When you look at when Miami's potentially been at its best offensively, it's been in the Duncan Robinson minutes. Duncan Robinson has been great from 3 in these playoffs, shooting 42.6%, 26 for 61 in the 2 playoff rounds so far. He was sort of lost at some points during the regular season, only shot 32% from the arc during the regular season, but has picked it up significantly in these playoffs. He's going to need to continue to do that. But the Heat have actually outscored their opponents by 16.8 points per 100 possessions in the 194 minutes with Duncan Robinson on the floor, I believe, in these playoffs. So whatever the ingredients are that makes that work, Duncan Robinson is going to be another important factor, I think, offensively for the Miami Heat if they want to have the success they want to have in this series.
Definitely. And will he hold up defensively as well?
Right.
Because the Heat, I mean, with all due respect to RJ Barrett, the Heat haven't played a elite wing duo like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum quite yet in these playoffs. Um, I guess you could argue Chris Middleton, but Chris Middleton wasn't quite himself. So um, this is by far the best pair of wings that they've had to face. So will Duncan Robinson be able to hold his own in those switches when Boston tries to attack him?
Right. So I think we both said Boston in 6. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Before we move on to the Western Conference Finals, let's talk 5 to 7 minutes on Philly's exit from the playoffs after they were up
Right.
3-2, losing game 7 once again. A couple questions. What happened to Philly? Why does this keep happening? And do you think Doc Rivers loses his job potentially?
I'll answer that last question first. I think he does lose his job. I think that was kind of the last straw with this era, and it's not entirely his fault either. I think he did a lot of good things in terms of getting this team to fight as hard as they did, and particularly in those road games that they won. They won 2 road games. If you told me before that series that the Philadelphia 76ers won 2 games in Boston
Yeah.
and had a game 6 on their home floor with the MVP of the league, I would like those odds, but it just didn't end up falling their way. Particularly in that fourth quarter in Game 6, I think that's a moment you point to. 4 minutes left, you're not getting the ball to Joel Embiid late in the fourth quarter. I think the offense just really stagnated, and I would have liked to see a little bit more um, creativity in that sense, getting Joel Embiid going downhill or getting him to seal closer to the basket. Um, it's hard to really say, what they could have done better in Game 6, but the Game 7, I just think, um, Jason Timp, the guy we mentioned earlier on Hoops Tonight, talks about it's a tug of war battle in the playoffs, and he talks about um, it's often a question of which team is going to let go of the rope first. The Knicks, when they lost to the Heat, they never let go of the rope. They fought like hell till the end in that
Right.
series. Jalen Brunson was the only one that shot well in that Game 6, but they kept it close all the way till the end. And the Sixers, they let go of the rope. Once they started, not getting their shots they wanted on the offensive end, they the Avalanche just hit them and they couldn't respond.
Yeah, there were times in this series where I was really impressed with what James Harden was giving them
Right.
in the pick and roll, doing a little bit of everything. I mean, I believe he scored, what was it, 45 in game 1, and then followed that up maybe a game or two later with 42 or something like that.
Right.
There were a couple games though where he didn't give them much of anything offensively. But I think they were still able to win one or two of those games. Can't remember exactly. And then it was game 5, the one that they won in Boston, the stunner that they won in Boston, where he wasn't necessarily giving them the mass output offensively that he was earlier in the series, but he had double-digit assists and was helping defensively, being disruptive on the perimeter, and being the great playmaker that he's been. But it just felt like to me that in Game 6, they had their opportunity. It was just that was just kind of like, okay, it it sort of had to happen eventually, or else we might be singing a different tune about Jason Tatum right now if he was never able to get it going and had a terrible showing in Game 6. But that just sort of happened, right? Tatum got hot. Yes, you had your opportunities, but that's that, right? It
Right.
sucks to lose a potential closeout game at home, though. It's hard to say what they could have done better. Of course, getting the ball in Joel Embiid's hands more would have been good, but I give credit
Right.
to the adjustments that Missoula seemed to make in that
Right.
game. And then it just seemed to me like the Sixers, after what it wasn't necessarily a demoralizing loss, considering that Philly had already won 2 games previously in Boston in this series. But anytime in a series, it's really hard to go beat a team 3 times at their place in the playoff series and only win once on your home floor. I think in some ways you could argue that was sort of a demoralizing loss from just like a mental perspective for the Sixers, that their energy level and everything else, their effort just didn't seem up to par for me in that game 7. And it is what it is, man. This seems to keep happening over and over and over again, and I think it might be time for change. in Philadelphia.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
I think they will move on from Doc Rivers,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And I like
Yeah.
Doc Rivers.
I do too. I don't hate Doc Rivers. It's a bit unfortunate that he has the reputation that he has because it's not all on him. But
Right.
there comes a point in time where you blew so many 3-2 leads, so many 3-1 leads to where there is a point where the reputation becomes so bad to where it's going to be hard to find a job moving forward. But one other thing I want to say is just to add on to your point is they were just not very dialed in defensively. It
Yeah.
just in the third quarter, it just felt like the Celtics came out locked in. Philly controlled most of that first half, and despite controlling the game in the first half, they ended up being down at halftime because of a few um, you know, lapses here and there, a few unlucky plays. I'd say that flagrant foul kind of flipped things a little bit, but they controlled that first half, and I feel like they went into halftime feeling good, and they came out in that third quarter just a little bit relaxed, and you saw it. They were just never locked in enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I echo that sentiment. So, with all that being said, we're both picking Boston in 6 to move to the finals for the second straight year.
Right.
Let's move on 22 minutes in to the Western Conference Finals, a rematch again of the 2020 Western Conference Finals. Lakers and Nuggets. I can start it off with my first point. I don't want to go 4 or 5 minutes talking here and just hog it, though. I want to have some back and forth dialogue.
Hmm.
So I'll just start it with this. For me, and I know the Lakers have had, what is it, 2 or 3 days, full days off before game one tomorrow night in Denver. But we have to consider the fact that this Lakers team, who's a little bit older and a little bit banged up, just came off a series where they played a game every other day for 6 games, and give them credit, they won that series against Golden State. But I'm just wondering, like, how does fatigue potentially play a factor into this series, especially considering the fact that they are traveling to a high altitude in Denver where it is harder to adjust and harder to play if you're not adjusted to that quickly. I think this is going to be the ultimate test of the great LeBron James and his stamina. We've seen him sort of manage his load in game. It's been pretty fascinating to watch, like conserve his energy at points in times. Um, and I think this is going to be a test of his stamina. He's been really good in these playoffs. He was great in game 6. How deep can LeBron James dig, though? I think will be not necessarily a deciding factor in this series, but the Lakers are going to need some big performances from LeBron. And then the next thing I'll say, and then I'll pass it off to you, is the biggest thing I think in this series is what do the Lakers do defensively to try to mitigate Jokic um, on the offensive end, who's been the Nuggets have been the most efficient offense so far in these playoffs. However, the Lakers have been the best defense by far, and Anthony Davis has been the best defender by far in these playoffs. He leads the playoffs in block shots and rebounds. He's been great when he's been at the rim, but when he's been pulled away from the rim is when the Warriors had their most success, making the Lakers supporting cast chase everyone else behind Davis. I think Jokic, considering the fact that he's shooting 48% from deep in these playoffs, um, it's just going to be interesting to see how they match up Anthony Davis. Do they potentially put him on Aaron Gordon for some of the time? What are the matchups here? Because I do think that Jokic, the playmaker from the top of the key, shooting the ball, being efficient, doing everything that he does, it's just going to be a fascinating matchup. And I'll pass it off to you to sort of make any rebuttals, any points you want to make, and then we can just keep going.
Right. Yeah. I'm so excited for this matchup. I just have to say that. Anthony Davis versus Nikola Jokic is a battle of two Hall of Fame big men. And this is a matchup that will be, thought of for years and years and years to come. And it's crazy that that's the case because um, there's really no precedent to really know what the matchups are really going to be. And you mentioned that we don't really know who on the Nuggets will guard Anthony Davis, and we assume Anthony Davis will be on Jokic, but maybe the Lakers will prefer to have AD near the basket,
Yeah.
roaming a little bit. So there's not really a precedent to really know what the Lakers will really decide here. So really, I think the ball is in their court in terms of what lineup they go with in game one. I think it'll be really interesting to see. And one thing I want to point out about the Lakers roster is I want to give Darvin Ham a lot of credit because he has
Absolutely.
a really deep roster and he has, it's built in a very peculiar way because
Mhm.
you put Vanderbilt on the floor, you sacrifice offense. You put, you put D'Angelo Russell on the floor, you sacrifice defense. It's different things like that where you're sacrificing different things. But Darvin Ham has been able to um, find the hot hand each night, like
Yep.
Lonnie Walker in game four
Mhm.
and Rui Hachimura early in that first round series as well. So I think Darvin Ham will continue to do that. It's just whether or not, it's just who will it be?
Mhm.
Who will it be? Rui? Will it be Dennis Schroeder off the bench? Maybe. It's really a lot of question marks in that sense. Um, Now for the Nuggets, though, offensively, I think Jokic. This is going to be a stretch of a comparison, but hear me out. I would compare him a bit to Tom Brady and some of those, prime Patriots offenses because, you know, you give him a look, you give him a coverage, you try to, confuse him with different looks and try to recover. He'll pick you apart. And then you don't bring the double team. He's just going to barbecue chicken you in the post, like,
Yes.
that Patriots running game with LeGarrette Blunt. Um, it's a bit like that. There's not really a way to guard Jokic. No one has figured it out yet. Um, and that's what's so interesting about it. Jokic is a walking elite offense. And I don't think we've ever seen a player like him before in the NBA, especially not at the center position. And I know um, I've said some things like that in the past about Luca, but Jokic is that, but in a different way. And I think it's better. It's like that on steroids because he's not dominating the ball. He's the he's the fulcrum, but he's not the uh, ball dominant player that a Luka is or someone else may be. And so everything flows so well within that Nuggets offense. So I think there will be different points in the series where the Lakers will be able to defend the Nuggets well. I think particularly in those non-Jokic minutes will be really interesting. But man, in terms of picking who's going to win this series, it's extremely difficult.
Yeah, and I give Darvin Ham tons of credit as well. The way that the Lakers have been able to just, ever since LeBron came back from his long injury stint, they have been one of the better teams in the league, period. Now, it hasn't always been pretty offensively some nights. They're not the most spectacular team to watch offensively. They're not going to wow you like maybe the Golden State Warriors would offensively. It can be a little tougher for them to create shots at times, knock down shots from the perimeter at times. But they've built this team on length and playing great defense centered around Anthony Davis, and LeBron can still give you some great spurts. I don't think he can give you the quite what he once was, but he's still really effing good.
And
Not
he's
trying
smart
to
about it.
curse on. Yes, he's, as I said, managing his load within the game, which I wish, honestly, more NBA players would do rather than just sitting out all the time. But that's another story for another day. But yes, I mean, this Anthony Davis, Nikola Jokic matchup, which I hope we get to see. Um, I think the Lakers, for me personally, might be better off keeping Anthony Davis roaming around the rim because I think that's where he's been at his best when he's at the rim, blocking shots, deterring shots at the rim, affecting shots at the rim. I think that probably be ideal. But the problem with that is Jokic can step out and do other things. And if you don't have another guy who can step in defensively on the perimeter, that could be trouble. Although you do have elite rim protection. That's one thing for the Lakers that you have. I think the way Nikola Jokic can make this tough, and one of the more underrated parts of Jokic's game, even though he's not the most athletic guy in the world, as we all know, and Davis has the advantage in terms of athleticism. One thing I think Jokic is great at, especially when he gets into the paint, is following his shot off a miss. He can really expend some Anthony Davis energy by getting his own board, following his shot, and making it tough on Davis, maybe even getting him into some foul trouble at times. He's got elite footwork around the rim. He's a great finisher around the rim. He's a great passer, as we all know, great playmaker, and he's been absolutely lethal from three in this series. So that Anthony Davis, Nikola Jokic dynamic, both have their certain advantages, I think, is going to be fascinating. And we can't really say definitively how it's going to play out. If I was Darvin Ham, I would test out keeping Davis around the rim, making it tough on Denver to score in the paint.
Right.
As tough as you can, and then go from there. Make adjustments if you need. He's done well, I think, making adjustments so far in these playoffs. But Davis hasn't necessarily. I mean, Looney's a great rebounder. I give him credit for that, and he's a pretty productive player for what he is. But Davis has not seen a player like Jokic yet in these playoffs. Neither has Jokic seen a player like Anthony Davis yet in these playoffs. So that's just going to be a fascinating dynamic. But I think the series is obviously more than that, right? There are other guys on the floor. I think for me, something that's fascinating for Denver is Aaron Gordon, although he's a notch below some of these other guys that are left defensively in the playoffs, has been pretty good in these playoffs, giving them a punch offensively, but also being above average defensively. I think, especially with what he did against Phoenix, I think him along with KCP and even Bruce Brown at times, those are all, I believe, or have been plus defenders so far in these playoffs, even though KCP has arguably sort of lost a step defensively, but is still pretty darn good. And Bruce Brown does what he does off the bench and this and that. I think those three players right there can make life tough on the perimeter for the Lakers. I think they had solid wing defense in their series against Phoenix. Obviously, I mean, sometimes great players are great players. Give credit to Kevin Durant and Devin Booker for having some of the success that they had. But that's going to be an interesting dynamic, especially Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who was a key cog in the Lakers winning that 2020 championship in the bubble. As I mentioned, the Nuggets traded for him because he brings championship experience. He's another shooter around Jokic, and he's a plus in terms of perimeter defense. And I think he's pretty much fulfilled those expectations to this point. Sometimes he falls too much in love with the three-point shot, and as I mentioned, he's probably lost a step or two defensively, but he still plays his ass off. And I think he could really be a key cog defensively and offensively for the Nuggets in this series. But I want to hear your rebuttal to that and maybe some other points, and then we can make our predictions.
Yeah. I would actually take it a step further in terms of the Aaron Gordon uh, defensive prowess. I think he's been elite defensively
Fair
this
enough.
playoffs. What he did on Kevin Durant, what he did against Devin Booker in spots, has been really, really impressive. And I think he's going to be extremely important in this series because he has the ability to have to stretch the defense vertically in a way that a lot of the Golden State frontline players couldn't do. One thing Golden State doesn't have a lot of, when we talked about this a little bit in the second round preview, is they don't have a lot of front court athleticism. And that really showed itself in their lack of ability to have front court scoring, and particularly at the rim, challenge some of these uh, Anthony Davis minutes, at the rim. And Andrew Wiggins was really the only one that was able to do that. So to me, Aaron Gordon is going to be extremely important, and I think Aaron Gordon is going to mostly be put on LeBron James because he's just a tank. I would kind of compare his body type a little bit to prime Iggy in a way. I think he's strong and stout and can kind of hold LeBron in the post in a different way from what other defenders LeBron has seen in these playoffs. So I think that's going to be really interesting. A really interesting matchup.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, I
and
probably.
yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry. One other thing is transition defense. Both of these teams really struggle with transition defense, and um, a lot of times with the Warriors, you saw them get out in transition, and really they were at their best when they got out and pushed the pace with Draymond and got to the basket. But a lot of times in the series as a whole, they would get out in transition and then settle for those 3-point shots. And I think with Jokic's passing ability and his ability to read the floor, I think the Nuggets will be able to find those gaps a little bit better with their athleticism and get out on the break and finish. But that will be a big question.
Absolutely. Yeah, those points are fantastic. Um, in terms of predicting this series, it's just so tough. I wish I
Yeah.
knew how the Anthony Davis, Nikola Jokic dynamic would play itself out. For me, though, and again, I could be wrong. I've been wrong twice on the Lakers. I said in the West or the second round preview, I thought the Warriors could potentially make a run to the finals, and I was wrong on that. Um, I think I had a legitimate reason for believing that, but the Lakers proved me wrong.
Right.
Um, and then, of course, in that first round series, they beat Memphis. Although Memphis, I think there were a lot of problems there with Memphis that we'll talk about another time. For me, I hate to doubt the Lakers once again, but and if they do it to me again this time, then I will not be picking against them in the finals. But I just feel like the Nuggets have been the best team and the most well-rounded team in the playoffs so far. And I do think this is going. My intuition and my gut feeling says this is going 7 games. And I feel like because the Lakers have been just so good at home, I think they can win at home. The key will be stealing a game in Denver, which I think they could do. But I just think Jokic is a force multiplier. And I think the Denver has enough offensively outside of just Jokic and Jamal Murray to win this series. And I question LeBron's stamina for another long, grueling series, especially playing at altitude. I could be wrong once again, and I'm willing to be wrong once again. But I'm gonna pick the Nugget. I'm leaning Nuggets in 7. But I'd be
Right.
willing
Yeah,
for you to.
I'm on a similar wavelength as you, but um I would just struggle to pick
Because,
against LeBron in a game 7
no,
situation. We've seen it so many times. It's a question mark just because we haven't seen it in a couple of years, but I think LeBron has been so smart about, you know, managing his energy. I think I think he would just go out and give it everything in a game 7 and give us some glimpses of that old LeBron we know and love. So I think it's so tough, but
I would
I
love, I would, sorry to interrupt, I would love to see Lakers Celtics in the
oh my
finals.
goodness, I think everybody would. Um,
But I would also love to see this Denver team break through and get there.
right, right. I think it'd be nice to see someone new because we have 3 players who have a chance to add themselves to the list of best players on championship teams. I think we have 6 in the league at the moment. I'm
Right.
not going to list them all: Steph, KD, LeBron, all those guys.
Hmm.
And now is some of these guys' chances to add their names to the list, and I'd like to see someone new on that list. I'm not going to lie. Um, I think I'm going to say Nuggets in 7. Even though I just said I struggle to pick against LeBron, it's a gut feeling. I just think Jokic is playing at such a high level, and it's a level that I don't think we've seen a center play at since Shaq. I'd say
Yeah,
it, it's gonna be a great series.
absolutely. Yeah, prove us wrong again, LeBron. We
Yep.
absolutely love to see Lakers Celtics 2023 finals.
Oh my
Who
goodness.
would have thought though that the Lakers would be at this point after starting 2-10, I believe it was in
Yeah.
the regular season. I believe their playoff chances were something like 0.1% or something minuscule like that at that point in time. But it just proves that it's a long season and you actually can remake your roster at the trade deadline if you do it the right way and you build your team around a certain identity. The Lakers have done that, and I won't be surprised if they get there. Um, let's let's move to parting shots, I guess, or wrap this thing up in a way that you feel is um, is it
Exemplary. Yeah.
yes. So go ahead, take us where you want.
Um. Well, I'll part by saying one thing on the Warriors. Um. I think a lot has been said about the moves that they're going to be willing to make this offseason, particularly with Jonathan Kuminga and Jordan Poole on the trading block, possibly. But to me, I think um, you go out and you try to get um, wing athleticism in defenders, and you run it back because you know as much you know crap as Jordan Poole has gotten for these playoffs, and he's deserved it to an extent. He hasn't played well. At the end of the day, he was a vital part to a championship team, and he's done it before. He's
Yes.
he's I think you know he'll be able to correct some things this offseason. And I think you add a couple pieces here and there, the Otto Porters of the world, some of those veterans that they had on that 2022 roster. You add that back in, and you'll be right back where you want to be if you're the Warriors.
Yeah, I echo your sentiment. I think, as you said, Poole was a vital factor in the championship team last year. He's done it before. He has an important skill set that is needed in today's NBA. It just didn't happen for him for whatever reason, for a variety of reasons in these playoffs. Some of it, I think, was decision making.
Right.
Um, Other times he was just missing shots that I think,
He was making
other
last
times,
year.
yeah, he would make. I like Jordan Poole. I've always been a Jordan Poole believer, even going back to his days at Michigan.
Right.
So yeah, I think he'll be back and better with another off season. Remember, he's still very young. People often get too worked
Caught in the
up.
moment. Caught in the
Fans
moment.
get worked up, and understandably so, because there's an emotional tie to your team, and you can get worked up in the moment, the heat of the moment, when your team isn't playing at the standard you think it should, or this player's not playing at the standard you think he should. But he's still very young, still a lot of learning left to go. Steve Kerr's still a fantastic coach. The Warriors are going to be fine. I think my biggest concern is size on the front line and athleticism on the front line. And then I just didn't love what I saw from Klay Thompson for whatever reason in these playoffs. I need to see what he looks like going into next season because I think he's lost a little bit of a step, but I still think he's capable of doing it. I'm not
Right.
saying that he's completely washed. It just wasn't the Klay Thompson that we usually see
Right.
in a playoff run. And I'm sure he'll be fine, but it left a little bit of a question in my mind. Like, what is Klay Thompson now?
Right. I think there is reason to have questions about Clay Thompson. Absolutely. And it would be really tough to move off of um, that big three core just because of how much winning they have done.
Yeah.
And I would really hate for them to do that.
No, I don't think you do that.
Right.
You you don't what do they say? Don't fix it if it's not broken. If it's
Right.
not broke, don't fix it. Like you can't win the championship every single year.
Right.
Draymond got a little bit older. It's one of the hardest things to do in sports is repeat. And I believe the Warriors have already done that with this core, right?
Right.
So this was bound to happen. They just met their match in a bigger physical team with a big like Anthony Davis, and give credit to the Lakers for executing their plan. And they were the better team in that series. But the Warriors, you don't. Draymond is such an important piece to this team. You have to bring him. You have to find a way to make it work and bring him back. And I think the rest will work itself out. Just go get some size and athleticism on the interior, and this team will be fine.
Right. And if you're gonna move anybody, I think Kuminga would be the guy, but only for the right deal.
Right.
It has to be for specific needs for a specific player who fits the profile you want. Um, and another idea is I'd love to see them bring back JaVale McGee. He's been sitting
Mm-hmm.
on the bench in Dallas all season long. I think he would be able to give them good minutes. He knows that Warriors culture, he knows that core, and I think he would be able to fit right back in, similar
Absolutely.
to Al Horford with the Celtics.
Yes. We'll have a lot more on roster construction and offseason talk about this team and that team moving forward. But that's largely going to wrap it up for this episode 165, our conference finals preview on the Raw Prospect podcast. But before we sign off, speaking of the offseason, the draft lottery is tomorrow. Is there anything you want to mention or say about the draft lottery before we sign off?
I I'm hesitant to say anything because I don't want to jinx it. I'm just really hoping the Mavericks can keep that pick. They're in the 10 slot right now, and if it stays that way, as long as they don't move down, they keep their pick because it's top 10 protected. So I'm not even gonna be greedy and say, "Oh, I want to move up." Like I don't care about that. I just want to keep that pick.
Yeah, and I'm not getting greedy either. The worst that San Antonio can do is 7. So not bad at all. But I'd be ecstatic with the top 4 pick. We have top 4 odds. I think we can get it. I'm not getting my hopes up for number 1, maybe not even number 2, where you could get a Wimbayama or a Scoot Henderson, although that would be great as well. But I'd be ecstatic with the top 4 pick for the Spurs. I mean, there are some other great players in this draft, and we'll start talking about the draft sooner rather than later. So,
Right.
yeah, that wraps it up. 50 minutes for episode 165 of the Raw Prospect Podcast. Like, subscribe, and I guess just like the Warriors' undefeated run through the Western Conference of the playoffs for the past 8-9 years. We are going, gone. Peace out.
Peace.